A very good afternoon and welcome to all of you who have joined our call today as we kick off our SIOPSA conference for the 25th time. What an absolute delight that we can be gathered here today as we all co-create the future of work and think about how we advance a digital workplace agenda. So proof of life, if you don't have load shedding where you are, please switch on your video and say hello to us. Lovely to see colleagues who are dialing in from different places of the world. You are welcome. You can just show us a little bit of... Hello, Cabello, how are you? Hello, Caleb. Hello, Valter. Dr. Dumi, hey, Romy, hey, Manuela, hey, Alavane. So nice to see some humans joining us today. Marissa, can you please share the slides so we can just give everyone an idea of the outline for our time together? We will be here until 1700. Hey, Duni, so nice to see you. Okay, it's not yet in. There we go. Awesome. Hey, Gail, nice to see you. And yeah, you're welcome to say hello to some colleagues and friends who might be joining. We really like this kickoff session because it gives us an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's happening within conference for 2023, but also just to give you an opportunity to put your hand up and say, I would like to share, I would like to submit an abstract and share about what we've done in our organization around advancing this digital workplace agenda, because we don't want to leave anybody behind. We want to make sure we're considering all the different parts of our business and make sure we are effective. The next slide, Marissa. Awesome. So today we are very privileged to be having Valter Adao, who's going to be sharing with us a few nuggets. So please make sure you stay online. I will tell you a little bit about him when he comes up. We'll also share with you some highlights from our conference in 2021, tell you a little bit about our abstracts for 2023, some of the speakers that have confirmed for our 2023 conference, a bit about our sponsorship packages, and also the conference team that are working behind the scenes to make our Jubilee conference a success. We'll have a time for some questions and close up with our president-elect, Dr. Rowan Koch. So a little bit around our conference, Marissa. See, with load shedding, everything is a little bit delayed. So just a few insights from our 2023 conference. And here we're saying, what are those latest insights that help us understand how digital transformation has been moving in the world of work? Some of you are already experimenting with a hybrid way of working. Others have asked people to go back to the office on a full-time basis, while others have taken the bold decision to be fully remote. Some of you are talking about managing wellness in a digital world and would want to hear what you've done. What are the lessons that you've learned? And what could you tell other leaders who are looking at managing wellness within a digital world? We're also looking at the role of industrial and organizational psychologists and all people who are working within human capital in accelerating digitization. So it could be stuff around the skills that we have. It could be information around what has worked and what hasn't worked in terms of the policies that we're applying to make our workplaces more amenable to a digital workplace. We're also looking at shaping an employer value proposition that supports digital transformation. So before the call started, we're speaking about how to entice people to stay in your organization. I think some of the unintended gifts of the global pandemic is that people now have fluidity in terms of movement. Suddenly, people became more courageous to try out different areas of work, try out different ways of working. And in that, organizations have had to be even more creative in terms of attracting and retaining staff. The other piece of our conversation at our 23rd conference is to ensure that we do not leave anyone behind. One of the key conversations in the world today is around diversity, equity, and inclusion in a digital world. Against the backdrop of South Africa, where our inequality is massive, how do we ensure we don't leave anyone behind? What are the opportunities? What are you already doing in the space that you're working to make sure you try and bring everybody to the same page? Okay, Marissa, back to you with the next slide. Okay, so if we just look back to our conference for 2022, we had over 650 delegates signing up, and we've seen an increase mainly due to the option of being virtual. So we found that we've got people dialing in from all over the world who come in and participate in our conference. We use a Wova conferencing app, which really helps us to gather the data around what is happening in the back end. If we look at it in terms of the hours, we can see that we have 7,515 hours of conference attendance. We also found there was quite a lot of activity on our message boards, where there were 3,486 messages being posted. We also had 690 views across the 150 stands that our sponsors had put forward. So it is an opportunity for your organization to showcase the work that they're doing, because there will be movement. Even though it's not always foot traffic, but someone will see what you're doing in your organization. They'll come and ask a question, or they'll come and really say, this is the work we're doing, perhaps we can partner. We also saw that we had sponsors and exhibitors putting up their virtual stands, and this came to a count of 1,350. We had 205 leads that generated from the virtual booths. And this varies. It could be a business opportunity. It could be something that you shared in a session and someone is saying, hey, I want to do work in that part of the world, and I see that you're doing something similar. Can we partner? We also had 2,701 delegate profile views. So what happens on our platform, people upload a brief CV, you get to see the work they're doing, it links you up to LinkedIn and any other online platforms that they're on. And this gives you an idea of the caliber of people that sign into our conferences. At our 2022 conference, we had 78 articles that were shared. So lots of knowledge output that was moving from one place to the other. We also saw that there were 25 meetups that our delegates arranged during the time, and this gave people an opportunity to connect, because sometimes we see a name online and we never get to talk. But what the virtual platform has enabled people to do is to say hello. So you can give someone a direct message, say, hey, I've read your book. I'm really interested in the way that you think about the world. And it opens up a conversation. So if you haven't signed up for conference, if you haven't submitted your abstract, this is just a little bit of a taste of what it would be like for you in terms of your experience with the SIOPSA conference. Thanks, Marissa. Okay, so, cannot hear. Is there anyone else who can't hear? How's the sound?
We can hear.
You can hear, okay. So it might be something with with the sound. Maybe someone can assist the delegate with the sound. So to help frame our thinking today around this advancing of a digital workplace agenda, we really wanted this gathering to be infused with some inspiration from an expert. So Valter is currently the Chief Executive Officer and Digital Leader, and he is recognized as an expert in the fields of disruptive innovation. We can hear you now. I wonder what's happening. We can hear you. Okay, so just taking it from the top, Valter is recognized as an expert in the fields of disruptive innovation, rapid commercialization, business reimagination, and emerging technologies in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Okay, and the work that he does there is varied within digital innovation. So he operates at the intersect of strategy, innovation, emerging digital technologies, and business modernization to lead organizations beyond potential disruption. So you'd have gotten a little bit of a taste of the work they do from the video that was screening when you entered the room. So Valter is going to be sharing with us some insights around digital innovation, and I wouldn't do justice if I kept reading his profile. I'm really going to hand it over to you, Valter, to frame it for us, the work that you're doing, and just, help us to think a little bit broader around this 25th conference theme that we have lined up. Over to you.
Perfect. And a good hello and a warm hello to everyone on the call. I'm just going to put my screen up. Give me a second, and then we'll get straight into it. There we go. You should be able to see it. So as first of all, It's great to be here, and thank you very much, Sharon, for hosting me. It's always a great pleasure to be part of a collection of individuals that are curious on how to explore doing business and conducting things differently in order to increase their relevance and resilience. So I'm going to spend about 30 minutes with you. There'll be time for questions. I'll try to shorten it a little bit so that we've got more time for questions. It's not going to be a conversation about technology. I'm not a technologist, but I want to focus on a couple of tenets. One is the importance of navigation, hence the title. I've got the view that some of the most successful companies in the world are getting their predictions and their forecasts wrong. What makes them successful is the ability to identify when they're going wrong or when they're off track, and to navigate back onto the right path. I think that's the critical thing. You're going to hear me talking about the mindset, the right mindset to thrive in this digital economy. And that's important because I think that's the critical differentiator to succeed in this digital economy. It's not about the deployment of technology. If it was just about the deployment of technology, then the richest and the oldest organizations would be the most successful and the most transformed, and that's definitely not the case. And then you're going to hear me talking about modernization and not transformation, again, to emphasize the importance that the transition that organizations need to go through is it's technology enabled, but the successful organizations are the ones that get it right at the leadership mindset level and at the organizational behavioral level. And if they get that right there, what we find is that they cascade and they tend to transform quite successfully. If you want to stay in touch, just pull out your camera phone, hover the camera over the QR code. It should call up a little yellow icon. If you click on that, it's going to take you to my LinkedIn page. Save it, and then if you've got any questions or if you want some of the content, just text me via LinkedIn and I'll share it with you. It'll be a pleasure to share some of that detail with you. The other context that I want to just share with you is that we work with organizations that are either listed or number one or number two in their category. So these are significant organizations, and we tend to engage with the leadership, the executive team of those organizations. So what I'm sharing with you are our personal experiences as a business, what we've seen, what works, what doesn't, things to consider, what we find has the greatest impact on an organization. It's not necessarily stuff that we've read and we're retelling. So it's really coming from the lessons, the good lessons that we've learned, and some of the tough lessons that we've learned as well. So getting into it, and look, let's have a fun. If there's something that you like and resonate with strongly, use the emoji. Give me a thumbs up on the screen. Let me know, and your colleagues and the other participants know that you're resonating with some of the key points. If you disagree with something, give me a thumbs down, and we'll pause there and have a conversation on that as well, because that's also where the learning lies. So let's start with this one. Irrespective of the organizations, the conversations we start with at an organization, it ultimately comes down to these three topics. Every single conversation distills and crystallizes into these three topics. Organizations are thinking differently and very hard about growth. And it's not growth to add more revenue and more profit necessarily. It's the growth that diversifies and de-risks the business. I think COVID was a traumatic experience for many businesses, and the fragility of the business model was certainly put under the microscope. So businesses are very curious and interested in looking at how do they increase their footprint, how do they diversify to increase resilience and relevance into this changing digital economy with an ever-changing macroeconomic environment. Modernization certainly comes up as an important topic, and the modernization, again, to emphasize, it's more than just technology deployment. I think there's a huge focus on technology deployment because the consulting companies push that, but shifting organizational behaviors, transitioning workforces and organizations is certainly critical. And as I mentioned earlier, the winners in this transition will be the organizations that can transition the mindsets and the organizational behaviors of organizations as they modernize. And then finally, it's about the enlightened customer, not the digital customer, the enlightened consumer. It goes more than just being able to connect with your customer via a digital platform or on some kind of e-commerce app. It's about the organization's ability to understand changes in consumption behavior and consumption patterns. Because if we can understand the changes that are taking place in the consumer psychology, we understand the job that consumers are hiring our products and services to do for them, as opposed to the features and the benefits and the attributes of the products that we create. And those are typically far apart. Organizations are very caught up in the features and benefits of their products, where consumers are caught up in the job that that product will do for them. And it's not necessarily always the same. If we go into a little bit more detail of concerns that executives have currently and questions that they're asking currently about the workforce as they transition into this work environment, the first one is, it was mentioned earlier, it's about, what does this workplace look like? 2-3 years ago, we were desperately trying to get people to work remotely, and we were figuring out what that means. Many organizations made very bold statements about the future of their work format. And now it's changing, and organizations and leaders are scratching their heads, trying to figure out how do they bring people back into the work environment. I think the key thing is that there's no clear and single answer. Organizations need to figure out what's best for the organization and best for the people, and they need to work out the balance between the two. But looking at what a competitor is doing or what a peer is doing to get to the right answer, I think is silly, and it's probably a lack of leadership in that regard. Number two is how work is being changed by technologies. Again, a big theme before COVID. There was a lot of fear mongering about before COVID around how technologies were going to destroy jobs. We never saw that. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but it certainly surfaced again with topics like GPT, which is getting a tremendous amount of PR momentum and media focus behind it. A lot of it is hyped and miscommunicated. And what we need to do as leaders is pause and understand what it means to our businesses, as opposed to retelling someone else's story, which is what happens when we're on the peak of a hype cycle. We don't go and interrogate and explore and experiment with the technology. We immediately assume that what's been said to us is absolutely correct. And we retell that, we live it. So we personify that risk. And then finally, it's the construct that shapes the workforce. And it can range from how we categorize our workforces. We love to use generational theory, which I think doesn't work in the South African context. Generational theory, when we speak about the different constructs of the workforce, works when you're in a economically homogeneous environment like the US, many Western European countries, etc. But in South Africa, you could have two people that were born at the exact same hour, same year, etc., but are born into different economic constructs, and therefore born into different generational constructs. So you could have someone that's born right now, and they're born as a generation AAA. I think that's what they call them now. But in Sandton, they're born into the perfect economic conditions with a lot of how can I say, they'll have a tremendous amount of support in achieving their goals as they become adults. Someone that's born a few kilometers down the road in one of the poorest areas in the country won't be born into the same generational construct. They will be born perhaps into a baby boomer construct, at best into a Gen X type construct. Workforce also speaks to themes like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting. We speak about mental health, etc. These are themes that we have personified, and we tend to just accept as the truth, and sometimes with not enough questioning and interrogation and experimentation behind that. Which it comes to which brings me to this point. We tend to elements or themes or topics tend to get hyped. Digital disruption was a really big one. The big hype around digital disruption, and now it's going to destroy industries and jobs and companies, etc. And we personify that risk, and many organizations and leaders head beyond that risk to say, well, that's actually what's affecting our businesses, almost taking a bit of a victim mentality. However, when you pause and investigate it, the reality is that digital is not the disruptive force. The negative attributes of a job, the negative attributes of an organization, the products or services itself, the industries that it's in is actually what creates is actually the negative attribute. The technology becomes the enabler to eliminate that negative attribute. And it's something to think about. Technology has been progressing according to Moore's law at it's doubling in capability and halving in price every 18 months. But that doesn't happen inevitably. It requires a tremendous amount of financial investment, human investment, organizational investment in order to progress at the rate at which it does. And the reason for that is that it eliminates many negative attributes. If it wasn't clear, and if adoption by consumers and customers, etc., wasn't there, then there wouldn't be the investment into those shifts. Let's make it real. Before COVID, I used to speak a lot on this topic, the future of work. There was this absolute fear that jobs were going to be destroyed by the progression of technology. And I actually penned a chapter that spoke about the moral responsibility organizations had to modernize. That this fear that technology was going to destroy jobs in organizations was, and which would typically result in organizations not modernizing, was more damaging to economies and businesses than businesses that focused on modernization. Businesses and industries and economies that don't modernize eventually become irrelevant, and they disappear in their entirety. Those that modernize remain relevant, and they actually expand in terms of their ability to compete. What's important is that organizations transition into this modernized state in a controlled and structured way, not at the last minute under tremendous amount of pressure, which then results in the negative press, people losing their jobs, workforces not being transitioned, etc., organizations becoming smaller and more insignificant. What was interesting is a lot of the fear-mongering was based on the work that phenomenal economists had written, Carl Benedict Fry, Enrico Morietti, etc., but their work was misconstrued. Big organizations that were publishing viewpoints that 50% of certain industries would lose their jobs, blue-collar workers would be disseminated, etc. The exaggeration, in my opinion, of that information led to some of these authors rewriting and republishing their books with to add some perspective to their data, to realize, to explain things like that. It's not, data alone doesn't bring about change. Regulations, economic attributes, participation by consumers, participation by the workforce, all of that has an influence and has to be brought into consideration when understanding how technology changes the workforce. So it can't be just doomsday or apocalyptic type scenarios. One has to have a balanced view that perhaps certain jobs do get eliminated if you look at it at a job unit level, but additional jobs get created, and jobs that we aren't even able to describe get created. And it goes a little bit deeper to say that even businesses and economic constructs get created that allow us to generate employment for individuals with low levels of skills and education. Ironically, there was a view called the Morovich paradox that said that while everyone was concerned about blue-collar workers, that the biggest jobs at risk were those of white-collar workers. And Morovich's paradox unpacked that it's more difficult to fulfill the function of a farm worker that picks a delicate strawberry off a plant than a statistician or an actuary or a mathematician that crunches very complicated numbers at an insurance company. And so Morovich's view was that, in actual fact, it's the high-performing, high-cognitive jobs that may be under threat from general-purpose technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. However, again, perspective. Throughout COVID, my view was that we should change Morovich's paradox to Morovich's irony. The technologies that we thought would destroy and eliminate jobs were the precise technologies which kept many of those high-functioning jobs relevant as we transition into a new work construct. So again, the importance of perspective. And I want to come back to this, how we view the workplace, work, and the workforce by bringing in an unrelated example just to challenge our thinking. I'm going to give you a scenario. And it's a scenario it's a real life scenario. It takes place in Spain, and it relates to a company that does live entertainment shows, live comedy shows. And I want to use this as an example of the importance of paradigm shift. So this organization, their industry gets levied with an additional 15% tax on live entertainment shows. So they typically come under a tremendous amount of strain, 15% of the bottom line. We've got smart people in this room. If we try to solve that problem for that organization, and we would probably leverage on our experience and our smarts to help them resolve it. And typically the answers I get from audiences when I ask them this question is, to solve that problem, why don't we look at the income statement? That's what good businesses do. Let's try and eliminate as many costs as possible. Perhaps we should shut down the comedy shows that don't make any money. Let's pay our comedians differently. Let's increase the frequency of shows. Let's spend a lot of money on marketing, etc. All those answers are correct. But those are the answers. That's how we've been trained to think in the traditional way in which we've conducted business over the last decade, 2 or 3, depending on the amount of work experience. What the leadership of this organization did, I thought, is a great lesson on thinking for businesses that are entering a digital economic macro construct. And what they did is they challenged their paradigms and they created an unreasonable value proposition. And their value proposition was, what if we allowed people to come to our shows for free? And then we charge them every time they laughed during the show. And they did exactly that. So they came up with that construct. They then turned to the technology to try and make it possible. And they simply put tablets on the back of every screen. The tablets, when you sat down, you had your face recorded into the tablet, you put in your credit card details. And every time the biometrics recognized the smile, they charged 30 euro cents. And the net effect is that this organization is sold out. All their shows are sold out, and they're making more money than ever before. Now, I don't want to get into the merits of technology, because that's not the point of this conversation. I want to highlight the importance of thinking differently as leaders. We're entering into a new economic construct. We need to modernize our businesses. We also need to modernize how we think. So businesses, if we go back to that starting point around the personification of risks, we still think about the technology crisis or the digital disruption that we're in. We're not having a crisis of technology. We're not having a crisis of digital disruption. We're having a crisis of imagination as businesses and as business leaders. And this example constantly, I use it as an example to constantly remind myself and my teams about the importance to challenge our paradigms and to think about how we construct teams to make sure that we don't get caught into this, caught in an ecosystem in an echo chamber of thinking in our teams and in our organization. So with that, I want to share with you a couple of principles that we believe teams and organizations need to embrace to break those paradigms and also to navigate more effectively into the digital economy. There are a number of principles. I'm only going to share 3 with you. At the end, I've got to summarize a summary of a few more, but just the detail of 3. The first one is around the plurality of leadership. And it really comes down to the fact that when someone comes into a team or an organization as a leader, they have an ambition, and they typically overlay that ambition with the reality of what's happening in the market. Ambition overlaid with reality allows us to develop a strategic view on what we need to do that leads to goals, strategies, etc., actions, and ultimately, at a very high level, that's how we get to strategy and execution. However, reality is changing around us continuously. We spoke about Moore's law earlier. So technology progresses at a phenomenal rate. How it changes businesses is quite significant, etc. So organizations can no longer rely on their memory of reality because it's changing. An example that I love to share with the business community is that a couple of years ago, we were worried that e-commerce was not a market for South Africa. There wasn't a big enough market in South Africa. There is a view still that e-commerce will be a small market in South Africa. Relatively speaking, it may or may not be. We need to see how it plays out. I certainly don't want to predict the future. But when we look at the utilization of internet in South Africa, this is a fact that many business executives aren't aware of. South Africans that have got access to the internet, which is about 70% of the population, are the highest users of the internet in the world. South Africans spend on average 10 hours and 46 minutes on the internet daily. Right? The average, the US average is around 7 hours. So South Africans that have access to the internet are the highest internet users daily internet users in the world. All right. So it emphasizes the importance of continuously checking and updating our reality, confirming and understanding the trends that are shaping, but also looking out for early signals that may become future and important trends. On the other side, we've got our ambition, which is shaped by our paradigms. If we are effective at tracking the changes in reality, but our paradigms are pretty rigid, we're faced with the same risk. Understanding a changing reality with an old way of thinking is ineffective. So we've got to develop that leadership mindset that says we are curious to explore being challenged as leaders, and a recognition that perhaps we're not the smartest people in the room anymore, and that we need to embrace a learn-it-all mindset as opposed to a know-it-all mindset, which is often, I still view that as a very traditional construct of leadership. Together with that, we've also got to embrace that in our teams, either in individuals, our teams, or our organizations, we need to try and facilitate two dimensions of individuals that when they come together, I think create a significant advantage for organizations that are transitioning or modernizing. The one dimension is dimension of foresight and perspective, which you'll see on the right side of the left side of the screen on the y-axis. And the second dimension is the dimension of execution and control, which means that let me go back a few steps. Foresight and perspective would suggest that I'm curious, I'm aware of changing constructs on the horizon that may impact my organization or my business. See the threats, I can convert them to opportunities. Execution and control speaks to my ability to quantify those shifts and those changes, identify the real value, the granular value they have for my organization, and then to implement it into action and ultimately to value. Organizations or teams with low foresight and low execution and control, I often hear them describing themselves as firefighters. I actually think this was a cool thing. But what I've realized is that a firefighter doesn't see the changes coming at them. And this is when I'm referring to teams that are continuously in a firefighting state. They don't see the changes coming at them, nor are they able to implement changes that are long lasting inside those organizations. So ultimately, I'm concerned about their relevance and the resilience over time. So those teams, I believe, will be victims of this transition. Teams with high foresight and perspective, we like to see them as visionary. I think they're very important to have those people and capabilities in our teams. But if that is coupled with low execution and control, then all those teams are just teams with visions, with a plan. Nothing ever comes from it, and ultimately people stop listening to them. Investors stop backing them, etc. So what we do need the converse of that are teams with high execution and control. And South African private businesses, the private sector in South Africa is very well known for its high execution and control quotient. So they actually want to minimize risk as much as possible. They quantify everything. We're very good at implementing, etc. But in a world where reality is changing, if we're so focused on implementation and we're not seeing the changing landscape around us, there's a risk that we implement the wrong things at the wrong costs over time. So we've got to maintain our execution and control capabilities and elevate that to increase our foresight and perspective. Teams with those combinations as businesses transition, I think will thrive. So again, as leaders, we need to try and construct these teams. We need to enable these behaviors inside our businesses. One of my favorite quotes and something that we try to live by, and to constantly test that we both hold that foresight and perspective and execution and control, is that we challenge our people to have strong opinions that are weakly held. In other words, no one's going to listen to you unless you've got a strong opinion that's well motivated, well backed with data, etc. But at the same time, don't be so rigid in your opinion that you don't have the ability to listen to someone else's opinion. So it's quite possible that if someone else has better logic and better data, and if they do, then update your logic and your data and back them. And that's how we become stronger in a very short period of time. Now, the second principle that we value in organizations as they transition is this mindset of ecosystem thinking. And ecosystem thinking would suggest that the path as you modernize is not a path taken alone. And that refers to organizations that you collaborate with, or how you bring skills into the organization, and the format within which that collaboration takes place. So we see it. We see large and small organizations coming together to create these ecosystems, and I'll speak about it in a second. We see small and large coming together. We see large large organizations coming together. And what's interesting, some of the most innovative and most digitally transformed businesses are achieving that status through ecosystem partnerships that they create. So they don't worry about holding the skills and capability for every single eventuality and challenge that they might find in their business. When it comes to the workforce, I think we've had 2 years, 3 years to figure this out. But what's interesting is that the traditional way of bringing people into our work environment, which is the left side of the middle block, which HR teams are challenged with, which is, you've got to recruit the right people into your business, develop them, retain them, etc. It is not necessarily the best way to bring skills into the business, specifically when South African skills are trying to externalize or dollarize their potential value. And there are many external skills that would be interested in operating in South Africa, but not physically so, as an example. So HR teams need to start shifting from this mindset of we need to own the resource. So in other words, we need to recruit, develop, and retain that resource, into one in which we need to be able to access the skill or the capability. We need to curate that capability to the problem that we have, and then we need to engage with them for a moment in time until the problem is solved, and then release them without worries about IP and things like that, which typically organizations think about. And then I suppose it comes down to this, we are certainly in this new era where we're shifting from the era of me, and not just to the era of me. It's not just to the, we're shifting from the era of me, not just to the era of we, but to the era of the digital we, which brings in things like Web3, the metaverse, how we're going to work, and it's certainly, I do believe what we've seen over the last 3 years has given us a hint as to what the future holds with regards to remote working and remote workforces. At a very high level, what does ecosystem thinking enable from a human resources perspective? First, gives us access to skills. You don't have to have the skills in the business. You don't have to go develop it. If you partner with the right organizations, you can get those skills overnight. You can get access to markets and customers. We've seen that happening very effectively in South Africa, where large organizations partner with smaller ones to get access to their market base. It gives them quicker access and cheaper access as well. And then also coming together to broaden offerings. So, by combining products and services, we reduce the risk of R&D, the cost of R&D, and we also avoid this greenfield stall, the time taken to launch businesses. And then, to establish dominance, you take, very successful organizations that come together with a winner takes all type mindset. And again, that ecosystem thinking and construct certainly enables that to take place a lot quicker. The last principle I want to share with you, and then I'm going to pause, is the importance of continuous learning. And I'm not talking about the learning and development that we see in many organizations, which has remained unchanged for many, many years. I'm talking about learning that focuses on uplifting the digital and innovation fluency. And it comes down to a couple of things. One is that our knowledge, our collective knowledge, everyone on this call, is decaying at a rate of about 30% a year. That means anything in our CVs that's older than 30 years is probably irrelevant in our ability to secure the next job or to contribute effectively to the organization that we're with. It's also about embracing this mindset that organizations are valuing hybrid skills as opposed to only deep technical skills. And hybrid skills doesn't mean we average in 2 skills. It means that we are deeply capable in more than one skill. And I like the combination of old world and new world skills. So a doctor that understands artificial intelligence, an architect that understands IT, an engineer that understands robotics holds a tremendous amount of value. And then the last point about STEMpathy, where we don't just focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but we also facilitate learning and development with regards to the human skills of articulation, storytelling, compassion, engagement, etc. And there's enough information that shows that the jobs that are showing demand around the world are jobs with a higher social engagement quotient as opposed to jobs with a high mathematical quotient. And when I talk about fluency, It's not about going to teach people to program or anything of that kind. It's understanding the attributes of the changes that are taking place. So understanding the possibility of exponential change, getting them curious about, so there's a big hype around things like the metaverse, artificial intelligence, etc. How do we expose our leaders, our people to understand the attributes, the business attributes of that? Because if they don't understand the attributes, they can't make decisions to develop strategies. They can't make decisions to deploy strategies. They can't make decisions to rapidly shape defensive strategies, right? So helping them understand the attributes, the language, what it means at a logical and a principle level so that they can contribute to the thinking. Understanding the economics of these new technologies. It's not just about being able to retell what they do, but to understand what is the impact it will have on our business. Does it unlock growth? Does it unlock productivity and improve quality and reduce defects? Or does it change the experience quotient we give our staff and our customers? What is our role in preparing the workforce for the future? How do we transition workforces in a less traumatic and structured way? And then finally, how do we lead in a bold and courageous way, where being the smartest person in the room is not necessarily the currency of success. It's the ability to extract the best performance and the best output from everyone in the room. And it might even mean that, the smartest person in the room is the youngest, least experienced person in the room that can contribute to the conversation. So with that, let me just wrap up on this one. This is quite an interesting one. It's an interesting stat. We picked this research up at MIT, and it basically said when we picked up that the more time we spent with our clients to help them understand some key concepts, we noticed that they were doing better in decision making. So we tried to find research that verified that there's actually a correlation between the two. And we came across information, a research piece from the MIT that showed us a correlation between the fluency levels of executive teams and the performance of their businesses, which was good. So performance in terms of growth, margin, and valuation. And they went further to say that across the globe and across a variety of industries, on average, CEOs only achieved a 23% fluency rate. In other words, they were ranked number 6 in the C-suite in terms of understanding the environment they had to navigate into. The CFO, the person that's going to make that investment and release investments to move organizations into the digital economy and to modernize, was ranked 11th in terms of understanding. CHROs, the person that's going to recruit and bring the skills into the business and retain them as organizations transition and compete with others, was ranked 9th in their fluency and understanding of what it means to move into the digital economy. And CMOs, the individual that's positioning the value proposition of the organization, was ranked 7th in their understanding of the digital economy and innovation. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. These are the 6 principles. The first 3 are the ones that I shared with you were point 1, point 2, and point 3. So unconstrained perspective was the leadership plurality, ecosystem thinking, and digital fluency and innovation. The other 3 that I'm happy to share with you at another time is around understanding consumption and consumption behavior, consumer behavior, the value in a digital value economics, and how to unpack that to understand it at the most simple level, and then the learning and the human construct of purposeful innovation. So with that, I'm going to pause there, Sharon, and hand it back to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Valter. All the cylinders are firing. I'm like, what are we doing in the world of work? And I think for me, the liberation of curiosity, that as leaders, we don't have to have all the answers, but actually we need to show up differently, ask the right questions, be curious, and also tap into the different intelligences. The 30% decay is quite startling. So the trap of thinking, but I have a whole PhD, I know a lot of stuff. Your knowledge is reducing significantly year on year. What else do we need to be opening up ourselves to? Colleagues, I want us to just have an opportunity to ask Valter or comment, just a few comments before I tell you what else is left in our conference plan. Any quick questions or comments for Valter? You can just unmute or put your hand up. I think I saw your camera was on.
Perhaps, Sharon, just to break the ice, I see Leah's got a, no, that's my hand on Leah's profile. Maybe as a show of hands, which of the principles resonate with the audience? So maybe principle one around the plurality of leadership, thumbs up to those that resonated strongly with that principle. All right. So someone, okay, there we go. Caleb?
Yes. Let me just unmute myself.
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Right. This was really, really interesting, especially on plurality of leadership, the ambition and reality. But I wanted to ask, with all these archaic companies which are full of old school, what is the approach? Okay, if we use South Africa, the old management structure of Transnet or Eskom, the big companies, we are seeing the decay which happens down the road because the management was rigid. We look for three quotations, whether the three quotations are outside the expected standards and the like. How do you actually transform an existing business to bring in these thinking principles? How do you break the camel's back?
It's look, that's a really good question, and I think one is, we mustn't. I would certainly not want to confuse having the right leadership mindset in the business with changing the effectiveness of governance. I think governance is important, but what we do need to do is we need to transition organizations to be, first of all, to be a little bit more proactive in the shifts, as opposed to getting caught up in platitudes relating to why it's not necessary to make a shift. And there's a variety of ways. At the most senior levels of the organization, I think it comes down to the board to ensure that there is either some kind of representation on the board that challenges the board, brings that ninth man type mindset to the board, or ninth person mindset to the board, that says that if the board is not shifting, then we need to bring on someone that's going to be the disruptor, the challenger to the board's thinking, and that in itself would transition down into the executive of the organization by a board mandate to say you've got to start thinking about that transition. The transition of an organization itself is not a complicated thing if it's done properly. It should be strongly aligned to the strategy of the organization, but with a focus on how do we waive or prioritize the changes that need to take place inside the organization. It's important when we think about the changes that have to take place inside the organization that we don't just see it from a technology perspective. In actual fact, the technology change is the easiest change. I think getting people to think and behave differently is the most difficult shift that has to take place inside the organization. At the lower levels of the organization, let's say middle management to lower, I think the biggest shift that organizations could enable that would bring about that culture thinking shift would be through fluency, very structured fluency programs that triggers purpose, that triggers understanding, education, excitement, purpose, etc. That in itself will also act as a magnet for talent and staff retention. So if the staff starts understanding what the organization needs to go through, they start believing the organization is going to go through it, and they believe that they can be part of that journey. The last thing I do want to share with you before we go to Pelo and her question is that there's also a lot of research that shows that if you've got resources in your organization that see digital as critical to their career capital development, and they don't perceive leadership to be taking the digital transformation of an organization seriously, there are 6 times more probable to leave the organization than someone that doesn't care about their career capital. So ultimately, the high-performing resources will leave your organization. I hope that answers, Caleb.
Thanks, Valter. Pelo?
Hello. Hi, everyone
Hi,
on
Pelo.
call. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's not so much a question, just some commentary around the points that I think are wonderful. Firstly, everything said is exciting.
Thank you.
Sure. I really resonated with the slides toward the beginning around growth, modernization, and our consumers. I think having these factors or elements as considerations is vital in digital transformation. And I also appreciated the points around shifting our mindsets on the why, the purpose, not wanting to be the expert in the room, but realizing and recognizing that it's an ecosystem of intelligence. So I'm excited to be in spaces like these, to hear such thought leadership, and to hopefully one day contribute to how we view urbanization and how we can leverage off of the digital age that we're in and not necessarily be afraid that robots are going to take our jobs away. So thank you.
No problem, Pilla. And just one thing that I'd want to emphasize. I was asked to contribute to a chapter to a book by Chris Ostergaard called The Ethics at Work. And it's what's interesting is that most of the contributors speak about how we need to be responsible in terms of the correct use of technology, responsible in how we use people's data and how we use artificial intelligence, etc. And my view is that one of the ethics that we need to embrace as business leaders is that it's our responsibility to make sure that businesses remain relevant and resilient. And you cannot be a relevant and resilient organization in a digital economy if you haven't modernized. It's as simple as that. Whether you're a mine, whether you're a state-owned entity, whether you're a retailer, whether you're a bank, or whether you're a tech company, if we do not modernize, those businesses will become irrelevant and all those jobs and the economic contribution will be lost. So we've got to take this serious.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank
To
you,
whom much
Pelo.
is, sorry, can I just say one last thing? To whom much is given, much is expected. That's a beautiful statement.
Yes.
And in the 21st century, we've been given so many agents to use as tools. So thank you.
Absolutely. Lovely point.
Thanks so much, Pelo. Kabelo, I see your hand is up. You can go ahead, Kabelo.
Hello, hi.
Thank you
Hi.
very
I
much.
just want to quickly ask, when you were explaining the whole generational and how South Africa shouldn't be analyzing, we are not yet there. We had a bit of a cut. So could you please?
Okay.
So
So my view,
Yeah.
my view on generational theory is that generational theories have been hyped quite significantly. So we like to talk about millennials and Gen Xers and baby boomers, etc. I think it's a good theory. However, it's a theory that I think was designed for countries or cities or segmentations that are homogenous in their economic construct. So what's the word I'm looking for? The similarities in people's economic capabilities is narrower, whereas in South Africa we have significant differences. So, for example, if generation, the theory of generational theory would suggest that someone born right now, two children born right now in two different places in the same city would fall within the same gender. In my opinion, in Johannesburg, you could have a child that's born into Sandton and is born into a AAA generation construct. A child that's born in Alice, 4 kilometers down the road and born into extreme poverty, perhaps, is not born into the same economic. They're born into the same time, but they're not born into the same economic construct. So I don't think they'll behave like a generation, AAA in a kid. They might behave more like a baby boomer or a Gen X individual because of the economic construct that they're born into. So it's a caution to say, it's good to understand it, but I wouldn't base an entire strategy on that segmentation. I would understand that in South African workforces, in the same age category, you may have 2 or 3 different economic constructs simultaneously in the same age group.
Awesome. Thanks, Valter. And I think that's also an opportunity for us to think through in terms of how we prepare the world of work, because that gap is going to be significant in terms of how we make sense of information, our reasoning capability. So the type of education, the access that you have will have an influence on how we navigate. So I know our session is scheduled for a 5 p.m. stop. So I've let the conversation go because it's really interesting. And I think there's more value in just getting your insights, Valter. So thank you so much for really spending some time with us and inspiring us to think differently. I appreciate the balanced view because the fear mongering actually pulls a handbrake on what's possible. And we need to be curious. We need to keep on learning and open up our thinking so we can participate in this world of work that's emerging. So big thanks to Fiona, who made the link up for us on behalf of SIOPSA. It really was an inspirational session. In the chat, we've put the document that is a call for abstracts. The slides are also going to be attached on the chat so that you are able to interact with the information a little bit more, decide if you want to sponsor, decide if you want to submit an abstract, and also just to follow colleagues on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. So I'll allow for any last thoughts from you, Valter, before we close the session.
I suppose, continue engaging on this topic. I think the human capital element in the transformation of organizations has sometimes taken the second place because the digital transformation conversation is technology, heavily weighted towards technology. But I do think that the difference between the winners and losers in this digital transformation phase that we're going through will come down to the organizations that get the human and leadership element right in their businesses.
Fantastic. The slides, yes, the slides are going to be shared on the chat. Marissa is going to put the PDF version for us. But while she's sorting that out, what's going to be new this year? We're celebrating 25 years of conference. So we have the story of SIOPSA, looking at the journey that we've come through. We have 6 keynote speakers. We've got high-profile keynote roundtable discussions. We also want to elevate our master students, our emerging psychologists, those who are newly registered, to come and share with us the knowledge that they've acquired. So remember, as a leader, we're not the smartest people in the room. So let's make the circle bigger and allow for different conversation. In addition, we have an in-person event to celebrate our Jubilee. And this is going to happen in Johannesburg on the 14th of July, and more details will follow closer to the time. Abstracts, so far we've got 30, and we're looking to get 40 abstracts. So if you haven't submitted something, please look at our abstract submission guideline that's been put on the chat. And Prof. Willie Chinyamurindi is leading our abstract committee, and he so generously offered us his time whilst he's on sabbatical, and really such a powerful conference team this year. And we're really privileged to be having all these different experts working in the background. And just for you to see who's on our conference team, we've got, our keynote speakers. Oh my, before I jump to the team. So far we've got Richard Landers from the University of Minnesota out in the US. We've got Prof. Renata Skuman, who is going to give us an impactful session around the impact on the brain of this digital transformation. What is going on to our brains? What are the changes that we're seeing? We also have Michael Jordan, who's a co-founder of Bank Zero, and Mahmoud Samandari, who's part of Soul.com. So he's the Secretary General of a global governance forum based in Geneva. So we really have a diverse range of speakers, and we're still open for others who believe they can add something to our panel of keynote speakers. Please do get in touch. And if you know someone who you think could add value to the conversation, please reach out and let us know. And lastly, our conference team, Marissa. Okay, and our sponsorship options. Sorry, I jumped. Okay, this is our team. And you'll see that in the slides. But just for those who would like to sponsor, we can see our sponsorship options that are there. So our main sponsor, it's for 250,000. Our Emerald sponsor will also have several opportunities that are up there for you, and that will be 80,000. Then we have our Sapphire, which will be virtual only, and our Platinum sponsorship, which is virtual only. We will be able to give you more details if you are interested to sponsor in our 25th annual conference. So colleagues, it is 5:06. I am going to end the session, but a very big thank you to you all for taking time to spend the afternoon with us. We look forward to hosting you at our annual conference, and please sign up. Tickets are available. Abstract submission is still open until the 11th of March. Opportunities for keynote addresses are still open, so don't wait, don't miss out this opportunity. A big thank you to everybody and have a beautiful evening. Bye-bye for now.
This